In this episode, Greg and I talk about Cixin Liu's three-body problem, both the book and the TV series. As is to be expected with a book review, the focus is initially on the book, but then we flit quite seamlessly onto the show, and you would hardly have noticed the transition. If you haven't read the book or seen the show, we would first inquire as to why, and secondly ask you to politely do so before listening to this podcast, as it does contain the odd spontaneous spoiler. Thank you, Greg, for keeping me honest as usual. Two and a mic clocking out. Enjoy.
Dong weche pek kod welo mabiro e tuanda mic. Dong parodit kod jok mawuoye e tuanda mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji e tuanda mic. Wola wachokre, wabed piny, bi wawinje, ero chako, dong omit ndi, podcast makende.
I'm joined by my erstwhile bollocks to that. Greg, how you doing, man?
I'm still fine. I know you are too.
yeah. I'm recovering from a cold actually, but no, I am fine, as you say. Just as an interesting side note to the prelude, about 5 minutes ago, I realized that our little brother had called me, and I didn't realize. So I sent a message back and said that we're about to jump into our podcast. Would he like to join us? And obviously the answer was no. I said, well, how about I just give you a call? And he said, don't bother, I'm going to be busy. So bye. And that was it. So he clearly remains adamant that he shall not join us.
Okay, fair enough. Have you got sleep available?
Yeah, but do you remember Sweet was so loud that we had to put it down, unfortunately. But
Okay.
I've got a running something, but that won't work either because you have to see it. So therefore, on a podcast, that's not particularly useful, is it? But anyway, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Editing. Anyway, so all right. So this was my
I'll never
turn.
make the cut.
You never know, depending on how adventurous I feel. So this time was my turn to make a recommendation for reading, and I suggested Cixin Liu's three-body problem, and so therefore we are now going to engage in the three-body podcast. Before we get into detail and rating it, and if indeed we've ever rated, I can't even remember now. Did you like it? But also, before you answer that, so maybe I should have changed the order of the questions. Had you even heard of it before I suggested it?
I had only heard of the book in terms of Netflix started advertising that there's going to be, but I didn't know anything about it at the time when because I hadn't actually seen the full advert. But when you mentioned it afterwards, I saw it everywhere. It's very strange the timing of it, because it seemed to coincide. Where they ramped up the adverts and about this show about to come on. So that obviously piqued my interest. And if I get onto your first question now, if I may, yes, I liked it immensely. I think it's extremely imaginatively written. I've never come across another book like it. And it doesn't half make you think.
So I listened to the audiobooks, and I should also state from the beginning that I've gone through the entire trilogy. So I've
That
done
seems unfair.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I've done Dark Forest and I've done Death's End. So I basically know what Cixin Liu has in store for people such as yourself who have just ventured out through the first book. But I went through the first one, and there was something about it which kind of, this was the first time, it was about 8 years ago, and I didn't continue. then in my conversations with the Road to Tarvalon podcast with Amber and Tracy, and Amber's a big fan, and so that's why I've done a couple of podcasts with Amber too. And Amber mentioned how great it was, and we had a bit of a conversation about it, and she really said, got to go back into it. So I did this, and she's obviously right. And the second time around, I don't know why, it just grabbed me. Maybe it's a mood thing. Maybe it was, I don't know, I needed a certain amount of time to mature somewhat before I could venture into this particular story. But it's not it's not so simple to pick up, I think. As in, you need to be motivated in some ways, perhaps.
What didn't you like about it the first time, would you say? Why didn't you feel the need to read the other two the first time, and what grabbed you more this time?
I think I couldn't quite get my head around the science the first time.
Okay.
I think, and I like science, but I just found the concept or the representation of this particular scientific problem to be a little bit beyond me at the time. Now, whether or not that's because I wasn't focused enough in certain parts, and so therefore I missed out. Sometimes it happens, obviously. But the second time around, I was. You said there would be no phone.
I did, didn't I? I almost lied.
That's all right. Go on. I don't mind recording you. And
no, it's gone. Yeah. I don't know how to turn this thing off. I'm honest with you.
Yeah, you are. See, we're talking about advanced science here.
Yeah.
So but I don't know. The second time around, it just seemed to fit, and it made sense. And yeah, like I say, maybe I was a bit more focused on the story. I don't know. Yeah, but you just went straight into it, and boom, it made sense to you.
Well, I mean, look, I think this is probably the most science-heavy sci-fi I've ever read. And what I mean by that is most sci-fi you read, the person who's writing it has got a great imagination, perhaps, but they won't necessarily be either a mathematician or a scientist. Cixin Liu is a scientist first and a writer second. So he's arriving at this from a different point of view to other science fiction that I've read. And because of that, the world that he's created, the universe he's created, is absolutely fascinating to me. Although I admit I don't understand all of it. There are certain precepts and concepts I can't get my head around, and that fascinates me all the more. But I will probably go into some of those later, I imagine.
Yeah, we will do. We will do. I have to say,
yeah.
I don't want to. I'm not going to do any spoilers, but knowing you a little bit, obviously, seeing as you are my brother, and based upon what you've just said, you are going to love Dark Forest so much. I couldn't possibly overstate it. As in, I think you are going to love it.
Okay.
Based upon that statement there, you're going to love it. The entire concept of what Dark Forest is and represents, I think you're going to go, wow.
So has he done what he did in the first book, which is to basically it's like peeling an onion. So where the book begins, you don't really have any idea or any concept of what's happening at the beginning of book one. And at the end of book one, you think you understand where you are. But at each stage during book one, as the layer of onion is peeled back, you think you know you think you know where this thing is going, and then it goes somewhere else. Another layer of onion is removed, and again you think, okay, I understand it now. But at each time he takes it onto a different place, a different plane, and it. I don't know what level of spoilers we're allowed to give, or how much detail we're supposed to talk about here, but I don't want to ruin it for anyone. But it's just an incredible ride.
Yep, that ride continues. The level of incredulity that you may experience will also continue, but I'm not going to give any spoilers at all, because I think that would just be completely unfair. Yeah, you're going to be I'm not sure if it's as layered, if it's more layered, whether the onion is bigger. It's hard to say. Yeah. When you start the story, so first you bought the story because it's a science fiction, fantasy, or just sci-fi, and you pick it up, and chapter one
It's
takes
not.
you back to the Cultural Revolution.
Brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I have to say, I love the first chapter, and because I was just thinking, how are they going to get from this to a dystopian sci-fi book? I don't understand where this is going. But it was a fantastic start, and I think it was necessary to understand the characters of some of the people involved and what their motivations might be, why one character in particular took some actions that they did, which leads us to where the rest of these books carry on. Because without that was one specific action is done, without which we don't get to where none of this would exist. And the motivation behind that is the Cultural Revolution of China, which led this person down that path.
Yep.
Because if they hadn't done what they did, I mean, look, it happens in the first couple of pages. So it's not a spoiler. They kill someone on stage. The great thing about this book, it's at once a book about philosophy, history, the human condition, sci-fi, the future, and a warning. All in one, all rolled in one, and it's just put there for you and discuss. That's where I feel I am.
Yep, yeah. I kind of touched upon this a little bit with Amber. Her response took the conversation down a different path. What I feel about this is, in some ways, some of the books, some of the stories that become iconic per generation emerge as a consequence of a reality which I think inspires, in many cases, genius authors like Cixin Liu to put pen to paper, because they feel, do you know what, damn it, I've got to say something about this situation. And I think he may have agonized for a very long time as to the best way to approach the topic of, as you say, the human condition, the current situation, I believe, that humanity faces, the current struggles, the current problems that it has with itself as a species. And I think he represents that in many very interesting ways throughout the trilogy. And I think in some ways, this is kind of like his warning. I don't know if he's done any interviews about this, whether or not he's had to communicate what his intentions were. But in my opinion, in many ways, this is Cixin Liu's personalized warning for humanity: sort your shit out. And that's kind of how I see this book. I think it's going to be an iconic story of its generation.
At the end of book one, you're thrown in at the deep end with AI in a way that sci-fi hasn't done before, which is to take an alien race and what they might do with AI, our AI, and what that might look like. And that's terrifying, frankly, because AI is being allowed to permeate every other technology in the world. So whether it's things you do online, cars, whatever you want, communications, all of that is going to be AI heavy in the future, because it's quicker and it saves time and money. It's also a dangerous thing. So I mean, so far the people who talk about AI being dangerous are talking about the AI itself somehow outgrowing its programming, its code, and causing a catastrophe or problems down the road. But where this book takes it is something else. It's not something I've come across before. I know that it's made up in a sense, of course. So sophons aren't real. It's not a real thing. But if they were, I want one. But I don't want anyone else to have one. That's for sure.
Yeah. I definitely want to get one of those VR headsets, but anyway, that's a different matter completely. Yeah. And the TV series goes into that as well, which we're going to touch on too. Right. But yeah, okay, cool. So I'm pleased that you enjoyed the beginning as well. I loved it too. Very often we find in novels that an author does a bit of a historical chapter to introduce a certain kind of storyline, which they then obviously revisit as a reason behind whatever plot line that they've got. We also experienced this with Bosch, if I'm not mistaken. So when they did like a flashback to Vietnam and so on and so forth, and then you go back
The whole
and
story
you
with
go
his
forward.
mum and all that. Yeah,
Exactly, yeah. So this is quite commonly used as a vehicle to introduce a storyline. It's done so here as well. However, the way in which it's done here, for some reason, makes me think Cixin Liu has a very unique approach to presenting this, because it's not as though it's an isolated visitation. It's something which he continues to refer back to with a certain weight of argument there, it seems to me. And I find his whole written style to be amazing. Now, let's just say that at the moment. And I want to get your thoughts on his writing style as well, because then I want to go back to something else which I've thought about quite a bit, and I'm never really sure where I stand on it. But yeah.
See, there's two things. Obviously, it was originally written in Chinese, this book, and it's been translated, I believe, by his brother into English. I read the book rather than listen to the audiobook on this one. So, in terms of prose, I'm not entirely sure what is missing from the Chinese original and how what we're getting in English. But I mean, certainly he's a fantastic storyteller. He draws you in with some real. I mean, it's not action all the way through. It's mostly dialogue, but it's great dialogue. And then you've got the various different timescapes and where the action is taking place and how the action is delivered to you. It's just really, really well written, and it's done from a point of view where you can believe most of the science that he's talking about. I'm not entirely sure how much of it is true, but certainly the three body problem is a real thing. That in itself has been a mathematical challenge that's been laid down for a long, long time. And as far as I understand, it still hasn't been solved. How these three bodies would enact with one another and to be able to predict any given scenario is something that they still cannot do. Obviously, he's taken that problem and he's created this universe with that in mind. So it's a great idea. I wish I'd come up with it. There's no possible way I could have come up with it because I didn't know it existed. But I love the way that he's incorporated his knowledge with history and science and that kind of question about where humanity's been and going, and do we really want to go there?
Yeah. What I also found interesting about the way he told the part about the Cultural Revolution, I thought to myself, didn't he get into trouble in China writing about the Cultural Revolution in the way that he wrote about it? And I thought, okay, so does that mean he's now living somewhere else? Because obviously, if you follow the various propaganda regimes around the world which talk about China in the way that it's a state of this kind or that kind, it's difficult to understand how he may be so critical of the Cultural Revolution and yet still roam freely. However, he is extremely popular in China. They've made a movie about this book. They've made their own series about the book to critical acclaim. They love him over there. So when I did a bit of research about how China or how Chinese society views the Cultural Revolution, there are a number of different perspectives, and they look at it as a period of chaos. They look at it as a period of change, obviously. They look at it as a period which has a very complicated context, and it's very hard for them to, and I'm talking about the different interpretations of the Cultural Revolution from what I've read. There is no conclusive final opinion with regards to the Cultural Revolution. They acknowledge a certain level of importance that it had in Chinese society's political development. However, it is also recognized as being a problematic period in its history. So my interpretation of Cixin Liu's representation is that the character who suffers the most and who takes the decision that you referred to earlier, she can only view the Cultural Revolution as a murderous period and a
Yes.
horrible period.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that's the philosophy within the book. The philosophy it starts with the Cultural Revolution, but really it's delivered to you by what happens to this female character, and what basically changes in her life and how that makes her act the way she does later. I mean, again, I'm trying not to give too many spoilers here, but the Cultural Revolution is kind of painted as almost responsible, indirectly, as to what happens to humanity.
Yeah.
Which what I found really interesting about this book as well was it's the first sci-fi book I've read where we have this kind of interaction between humans and aliens. And I've never seen it delivered in this way before. This level of depth of thought as to what it might look like. I mean, if we go back to the beginning of when any alien books or films we've had, it started off really simplistic: us against them, fight. They meet, they fight. It's like are we stronger than them? Are they stronger than us? Then we had sort of in the 70s and 80s a little bit more hopeful. We had close encounters of the third kind, E.T. It's kind of, we can get along, right? We can, and then of course as we moved on through the 80s and got to the 90s, we have more sort of Alien versus Predator and that kind of not getting along. Murder, death, kills all day long. But with this kind of level of interaction, where you're having to deal with concepts, and that's what you're dealing with concepts where you have to really think about what it is telling you, and you're dealing with something that's so far away and yet so imminent, and that's really what fascinates me. And how he came up with these concepts that are in this book is just incredible.
Yeah, obviously that's the question at least I can't answer. But when I think about some of the storylines, I think it's quite reminiscent of, and I'm talking about throughout the trilogy, yeah, because you're obviously at a certain point, and I have in my mind also the continuation of the story. So I cannot simply limit my thoughts now to the first book. It seems to me he kind of refers to the impact of propaganda upon the propagandists as well. And it's sort of like a bit of a lesson in some ways to say the truth will out. And you'll probably get what I mean as you go through the trilogy. So just bear that in mind, because a lot of crazy things will start to occur, and it's amazing the way that Cixin Liu kind of guides you through these different sentiments, and you experience different levels of either anxiety or relief in relation to the propaganda being put out at the time with regards to the story's timeline. But anyway, we're supposed to focus on the three-body problem. It's in book one and not focus too much on what comes thereafter. What I was talking about earlier with regards to writing style, when I was reading book one, at least, it kind of came across a little bit like I was reading Herman Melville.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the classic, obviously, Moby Dick is a great book if you remove the vast chunk in the middle, which for me is just a documentary. Now, I hate whaling and the human brutality which almost wiped out whales from existence, and I think it's very important that attention is drawn to the horrors of whaling. But in the context of reading this book about Moby Dick, and I wanted to read about Ahab and Moby Dick, and obviously we'd seen lots of different movies and stories allude to this storyline. That vast section of the essentially documentary in the middle kind of threw it for me a bit, and that's why I don't really like that particular classic so much. What's weird is with Cixin Liu, when he kind of introduces that kind of vehicle to tell the story of Trisolaris, I'm not so disturbed by that documentary style storytelling, because I find the intellectual manner in which he engages the reader by introducing that particular mechanism For me, it's brilliant.
You mean the headsets?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
He throws people into this game,
Yeah.
and through the game, they experience the entire, more or less, not
Yeah.
quite the entire history, but the entire struggle
Yes.
of this species.
The concept of Trisolaris. Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. It is something that you learn throughout the book, because at the beginning you just think it's a computer game. You know, there's no explanation. There's just someone puts on a headset and you think, okay, that sounds pretty cool. But we're dealing with a sci-fi book. Why shouldn't it be a game? Of course, you later get to understand the nuance of what the game represents, and that's when the book really becomes more and more interesting, and it draws you in further, and then hacks your head off with a big knife.
Literally. Yeah. In general, what do you think about that approach? As in, do you know what I mean when I compare it to Herman Melville? As in this, I'm not so sure if I've ever read a book which introduces a completely different element to it in that same way. Because he speaks like a scientist. He communicates almost on, it's like a factual basis.
Yes.
And it's delivered in, as Crichton would put it, deadpan mode. But it's perfect.
So you mean when you're in the game, it changes. But I think the difference is you were talking about in Melville, you have to remove the whole middle section, but those parts are actually delivered in relatively short bursts in Three Body. So you'll get someone entering the game, and they won't be there for more than, say, 10 or 15 pages. And in those 10, 15 pages, a new element will be introduced of the three-body problem. And you'll start to, and because you're watching the game being played out, as they move up the levels, you're learning more about Trisolaris. And by doing that, and then going back to the real world, and then back to the game, back to the real world, you never feel as though that you're kind of having to do a big chunk of learning all in one go. So I think I get what you're saying, but I think he very cleverly interweaves those passages alongside the narrative story.
Yep, that's cool. Okay, so let's get to the science, because otherwise I can't hold it off any longer. Let's get to the science, at least whatever elements of the science that intrigued you the most. What did you find to be, wow, that's something?
Well, I mean, of course, when you're first introduced to the three-body problem, that's something to get your head around, because it's not something I've come across before, and I found that really very interesting. I think I've mentioned sophons already briefly. Again, not something I've ever heard of before, because it's made up in this instance, but it's an incredibly interesting piece of writing, and if something like that were to exist, it could be terrifying, absolutely terrifying. But it's the way that they unfolded the sophon, and a description of the sophon unfolding, and how they got it. They had the experimented and they got it wrong a couple of times, and the descriptions of that, I just found that amazing. And for him his knowledge of science is way beyond mine, which is why he's able to even perceive these concepts. But I loved the way that's delivered in the text.
Before, when I said that the first time around, when I read it, that I didn't continue with the trilogy, and you kind of asked, okay, why? And the second time around, I felt I was constantly waiting for this dimension game, or this section which refers to the different dimensions, because I think that was one of the main science theory sections which basically just completely threw me off. And for some reason, in my mind, that section stretched to encompass the second half of the book. So I was constantly waiting for that entire section to be extremely long.
It wasn't, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was only like a chapter or two, if I'm not mistaken.
It's just what I think it's did within one chapter, or
Yeah.
maybe two. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But
And,
I mean,
and they weren't long chapters. It's a few pages, literally.
that in itself, I mean, just think about that. Yeah. So we're talking about a shift in dimension, and the effect, the psychological effect that theory had on my recollection or enjoyment of the book,
Mm.
and then my, for some reason, interpretation thereafter going back
Mm.
was that section was much longer than it really was.
Yeah. I think because you felt it was so fundamental that's why it felt that way to you. I particularly liked the build up to that, because that's the Trisolarans' solution to a problem. Because it's at one point the science minister, I think it is, walks in and says, "We've lost. We're sending these ships to defeat." And the way that's brought out and thought through, and you think, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because of the nature of Trisolaris, the growth of their civilization and the development of their species has been made over a huge length of time because of the nature of the three-body problem. And it has meant that Trisolaris takes a long time to evolve because they all die. There's so many spoilers, and I'm saying no spoilers, but I don't know whether to continue with this or not, because we're very much going into spoiler territory here.
It'll be a spoiler for somebody who knows the different dimensions of space, I guess. Otherwise, we're not spoiling anything for them because we're not capable of explaining the theory properly anyway. But yeah, I mean, okay, let's pause the scientific progress then there, because what's also interesting for me, and you kind of mentioned it a bit when you talked about the plot, but I was going to ask you beforehand, and you said in our pre-podcast conversation that you are going to finish the trilogy. Yeah, why? What drives you to determine that?
I want to know what happens to mankind. I want to know how. I think ultimately mankind must grow to such a level that they're able to solve the three-body problem themselves, or they must find a way to break free of the solution that the Trisolarans have sent to Earth to enable them to win the upcoming battles. It'll be incredible to see how they manage to do that. But I must say, I'm just on the last episode of the TV series at the same time. So, and I think that's probably gone into book 2. Would you say that's correct? Because I don't believe where we are in a TV series is where we finish book 1. Well, I know it isn't. So obviously that's taking it a little bit further. But I don't know whether the TV series, how far it differs from book 2. Whether this idea of the communication idea that they have to get some influence into the Trisolarans that they go with in the TV series, whether that's followed in the books.
That's an interesting one. I think this book series was considered almost impossible to turn into a TV show for any number of reasons. So the people who made the show have done a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we want to talk a little bit more about the first book, but we'll do that later on. You want to also compare in some ways the TV series. I don't know if it's necessarily blow your mind or not, but actually the TV series takes some from books 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
So that's nothing that I can tell you about because it just wouldn't make any sense. What I would like, I guess, to do though is each time when you finish reading Dark Forest, let's come back and talk about that. And then when you finish Death's End, then let's talk about your final conclusions with regards to the storyline. I'm pretty sure you're going to be as I'm not even going to say it. I don't want to give any kind of direction as to where things may go. So yeah, but let's talk about the TV series in relation to the book. Not all the characters are the same.
No.
There are other characters the TV show has introduced. Some characters the TV show has completely removed.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
but
think
it still
about
works.
Yeah.
I think it's still. I think they've been very clever in the way that they've written the TV series. Like the characterizations and the casting is fantastic. Really, really great. I love this. I love the way the story flows. The mystery is still there. You still have the connections with the Cultural Revolution, and that's still represented and explained as to why certain characters do what they do, which obviously leads us to where we are. Although it's very different from the book, I think it stands alone and as a great piece of television, a great series, thoroughly enjoyable, well written, and very, very, very well produced.
Yeah, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because the books were, I think they first came out in 2000 and as in Body Problem, I think first came out in 2008. So there's only been about 16 years for people to have a relationship with it, and it's only a trilogy. And I'm saying only because I'm in some ways comparing it a bit to the Wheel of Time, where people have had since the early 90s time to develop their relationship with all of the characters there. And when you compare the TV show of the Wheel of Time with the books, of which there are 14 plus the prequel, there is a substantial difference. But people are so invested emotionally into the characters of the book that when they turn around, some people, because I thought the show was amazing, but some people watch the TV show of Wheel of Time, and that there is a certain element of disappointment because this character is not in it, or that particular event didn't take place, or maybe it will take place later on. However, I completely agree with you with regards to Three Body Problem, and what I think may be the case, because I've read James Clavell's Shogun. I watched the old 1980s one version as well, and James Clavell, I think, was one of the co-producers on the original show. Obviously he's passed away, and so therefore wasn't available for this particular one. Now I haven't seen Shogun. I don't know if whether or not there's a significant difference between what James Clavell wrote and what the story was, but I seem to believe that nowadays there is a certain ability to adapt a story so well for television that even when they introduce significant alterations either to the cast of characters or to the storyline, they deliver it, generally speaking, in a very clever way. And I think that's exactly what they've done here in Three Body Problem. It is fantastic the way that they've changed it.
I agree. What I was going to say was it's very rare for me to say that I've read a book and then watched a series and I loved both. Usually you end up disappointed in one or the other. Most of the time, it's the series can't keep up with the book because the book is just so much more descriptive and it really takes you to places that TV struggles. But in this instance, I think the TV series, though very different in many ways, was just as compelling, and I really enjoyed watching it as well. I will say that the science in the book is heavier than the TV series. Possibly naturally so, because it's a little harder to get heavy science done in an interesting and yet believable way on the screen. But on page, especially when it's a scientist writing it, he's able to put that put those words down in a way that really draws you, really takes you to a place he wants you to go. So the TV series less science heavy, possibly because it has to be, but no less enjoyable for that.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned Shogun. I have watched Shogun and I really like that. I think a lot of these TV series that are coming out now, obviously they're putting big money behind it. Obviously you have a lot of competition between the different streaming platforms, so they have to be of a certain level. And I think at some level, Game of Thrones was a game changer for the whole way TV series are viewed. Before that, TV series were very much a sort of poor companion to the film industry, whereas now the budgets are probably one and the same. I would have thought they're really putting money and great acting, great actors and directors doing the series as well as doing the films.
I agree. And also, as you were speaking, you kind of led me in the same direction of thoughts, and then you said exactly what you made me think, that perhaps Game of Thrones in some ways revolutionized the way people want to see their TV shows. It's always been the case that with a TV show, with a TV series, you can develop characters obviously better. There's a lot more time. There's a lot more opportunity to show who the person is, to go into the backstory and so on, which you don't in a film. You've got between 90 and 240 minutes, depending on how long the damn thing is. Whereas with a TV series, you could just keep going, can't you? I mean, Game of Thrones was 8 shows or 10 shows each. 10, wasn't it?
I think it was 10 episodes, and was it 10 series?
10 episodes, I don't know, 7 or 8, I can't remember.
7 or 8 series.
Yeah. And so that's a significant amount of storytelling. That's a significant amount of character development. Okay, maybe not so in Game of Thrones because they killed everyone every 5 minutes. But I mean, generally speaking, the quality of character representation there and character development was phenomenal. Plus, we're not even talking about the world. We're not even talking about the way in which, I mean, it was just so realistic. All of the horrific elements that were exhibited in that particular series. So, yeah, the standard for delivery of TV shows has jumped. And what's also really interesting to see is so many of these tech giants jumping in and putting down some serious cash. I mean, Amazon, Apple, then you've got obviously Netflix with regards to Three Body Problem, but on the other hand, some of the more traditional movie creators in Disney and Paramount and so on. But we're talking about Apple as well. The general quality of their produce is phenomenal, and they're really putting a lot of money behind that.
All of them are having to up their games. That's great for us consumers.
Definitely, absolutely. That's the way I see it too. A question I've often asked in the past, coming towards the end of this particular episode, would you? I know this is a silly question to ask, but I've got to ask it. Would you recommend Three Body Problem to others?
I absolutely would. I mean, I think that there'll still be people out there who will resist because they just don't like sci-fi. If you don't like sci-fi at all, perhaps this is not for you. But I would still urge everyone to give it a go. Just purely if you look at it from a philosophical point of view and a science point of view, there's still enough there to keep you interested. And if you do like sci-fi, definitely is a book for you. Everyone who likes their sci-fi should read this book. There's a little bit of everything in it. There's even humor in there. There's some great humor when the banter around. During the Cultural Revolution, where they're all sending up their messages into space to communicate with any possible aliens out there, the things they write, and then no, hold on, don't say that. It's actually really humorous. I love the way that's written, and just one quick gag when the character of Darshi is asked, who's obviously a policeman in the UK at the time, is asked, "Don't you know your enemy? Isn't that what Sun Tzu said?" He said, "Don't know, I'm from Manchester." It's just
yeah, that's really good.
That's great. But there's humor, there's tragedy, murder, so much intrigue, and a lot of really interesting scientific. Some of it's fact, and some of it's fiction, and what that's what great sci-fi should be.
Okay, you obviously focused a bit more on the show than the book when you referred to that I'm from Manchester bit. Yeah,
that particular. Okay, from
cool.
The show.
Yeah, fair enough. With regards to one last aside with regards to the book, I love watching American stories. I love American storytelling. We grew up with Hollywood. We grew up with all of these Western creations with regards to these movies. Every time an alien came, of course they ended up in LA, or all of these things, they always happen in America because that's just where you went. If you're an alien, where'd you go? Let's go to LA, or let's go to Vegas, or whatever. That's where they turn up. I found it so refreshing, and this is my own ignorance, because if I'm sure every culture which has a very rich culture of literature, and every culture that has so much wonderful literature, I want to say, they surely have their own storytelling, and I'm simply not aware of it. But this one really drove home the fact that, aliens might want to go somewhere else, or they might want to interact with people who are perhaps not English speaking. And that was fantastic for me to kind of perceive how would Chinese people deal with an alien threat. And this really brought it home to me.
One thing which we haven't mentioned, which I think it actually is quite important in both the book and the series. This is what it has taken for the governments of the world to come together, and actually work as one. And you see, any time a country goes to war, it kind of draws the country together. So regardless of the different political factions, they seem to sort of come together in order to be able to face a common enemy. And I mean, of course, it is a natural thing, but I think it's also important to point out, because it's something that he's very clearly labelled, that look, we are of one people, we are of one, and we are so divided in the world today in almost every single way, every way you could possibly. It's just slightly refreshing that it has taken something of this, an existential threat of this type, but there is something that brings us together. It's just something I think is important to say. Right now, I can't see anything short of this bringing everyone on this planet together. And whereas the usual old aliens who would come down and say, "Take me to your leader," and want to go and meet our governments, I think they're taking a look at our government and said, "Actually, you know what? I don't fancy it."
Yeah. Let's give this planet a pass, shall we? I definitely would have done. I mean, you talk about existential threats. We've got the climate crisis, and that's an existential threat, and nobody gives a shit, or at least, unfortunately, none of the politicians give a shit. But anyway, that's a different podcast episode.
It is.
Yeah. All right, Greg, your recommendation for our next book review is
C.J. Sansom's Dissolution. It's a book series that I've recommended to you some years ago, and I understand you still haven't read it, so we're going to do this for next time. The timing coincides happily with, I'm not sure which book is covered, but one of the books, I guess, is going to be covered in the new series that's being released on a streaming service coming close to you soon. I think it's on Amazon. Is that right?
No, it was released yesterday on Disney Plus.
Disney Plus, that's right. So yeah, Dissolution's on Disney Plus. Other streaming services are available, and so it's given us an opportunity to read the book.
Definitely, but it's not presented as Dissolution. It's presented as.
I've forgotten. It's just Shard Lake's he's the title character. So it's a Shard Lake series, and Dissolution is the first book, which is the one we should read. As I say, I've not seen anything of the TV series at this point, so I don't know whether it's based on book 1, 2, or a combination of different books.
Yeah. I love Sean Bean. I have done ever since he was Private Sharp, and I'm pretty sure he's going to keep his head at the end of season 1, and that's always a good thing.
Well, we should have to wait and see. Let's face it, 16th century England, keeping your head was by no means a guarantee.
No, indeed. But there's more than one book written, so therefore I'll keep my fingers crossed. But I have a feeling that's a good one. It's a good bet, that one.
I don't think he plays Shard Lake, Richard, Mr. Bean.
No,
I don't think he's playing. I don't think he plays a title character.
Okay, then in that case, I withdraw my statement, Your Honor. And we shall see what happens. But yeah, I shall delve deeper into the mystery. Okay, Greg, thank you very much. I'm really happy that you read Cixin Liu. I'm happy that I read Cixin Liu. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on Dark Forest, and also when season 2 comes out on Netflix show. But anyway, cool, great. All right, thank you very much, Greg, and enjoy.
Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing your ideas on Shard Lake next time.
And a mic.